Add a vendor. The vendor record is where we store the vendor's contact information, set up online parts ordering, pay AR invoices, and a whole lot more. Let's add a vendor and check out all the features in this section of MaxxTraxx Pro CE. From the menu bar, click Vendors and select Accounts Payable Vendor List to open the vendors window. Check the Show Inactive Vendors box to view any vendor records that may have been deleted, as they can be reactivated by right-clicking on the name and selecting Undelete Vendor. We'll just click the Add Vendor button in the lower left to open a new vendor record. And here we are on the General screen. Now the first thing we need to select when starting a new vendor record is the record type, either person or company. The reason is, and you'll see this as I click back and forth between these options, a person vendor searches by name, and a company vendor searches by the company name, not the contact name. And once this is set, you cannot change a vendor record from a company to a person. So let's pick company and enter Merle's Auto Supply. And my contact is Mark Ellis. Now we have to enter a vendor code, and I just typically use the first letters of the company name, MAS, and you can put up to 6 characters in this field. And when you create a new vendor record, these are the only 2 things that you have to enter, the name and the vendor code, before you can save it if you want to come back to it later. But let's keep going. We'll put in their address and their suite 100. And if you just enter the zip, it will auto-populate the city and state for you. Change the country if you're outside of the US. Then enter an email if they have one, and their website for reference. With an email address entered in the vendor record, I can click this email button down here, or from within an RO by clicking the email button, the system will automatically start an email in my emailing program with Mark's email address loaded. If we check this Recall Last Check box, the system will remember the last amount paid to this vendor with the corresponding disbursement in the check writing function. So the next time you write a check to this vendor, that information is already filled in on the check. This feature is very helpful if the payment amount is the same each time. Now we can enter the credit limit the vendor has established for us, and this is just for reference. It doesn't limit our charges. And the number of open charges, total credits, and net payable are all auto-populated as you enter charges and credits into the system. Again, we could just click the OK button to save our record now and return to the vendor list, but let's keep entering information in the vendor record. Click the blue underlined phone link here on the left, and here we click the Add Phone button to open the Enter Telephone Number window. Enter the telephone number including area code and the extension if they have one, then select the phone type from the drop list, or we can type the first letter of the entry to auto-populate the phone type, B for business, F for fax, H for home, or M for mobile. And check the default 1 or 2 boxes to select this phone number as a primary or secondary number. Click the OK button to save changes to the new phone number record, and we'll return to the phone screen to add more if we like. With these buttons, we could edit or delete the highlighted phone number as needed. And the dial button will automatically dial the highlighted phone number if you have the auto dial phone system installed at your shop. Now let's click the mailing address link, and if you have a separate mailing address for this vendor, enter it here, and checks written to this vendor will have this mailing address instead of the address on the general screen printed on the check. If nothing is entered here, the system uses the address on the general screen for those checks. And note the automatic zip code list doesn't work on this screen. We have to manually enter in city, state, and zip. Next is the account link, and this is where we enter our account number, which will print on our purchase orders and checks written to this vendor, up to 20 characters. The date we started our account with the vendor, and today's date will be entered by default, or you could click select and choose from the calendar. The vendor's federal and state tax ID are for reporting purposes, and these print on the 1099 tax form if you have this box checked to print out your 1099s at the end of the year, or check if they're a corporation. Enter the vendor discount percentage your shop receives off list for parts from this vendor's catalog. Many electronic vendor catalogs don't list your cost, so the cost of the parts imported from this catalog is calculated using the discount percentage you receive from this vendor applied to the catalog list price. The resulting parts cost is then used to calculate the selling price of your part using the part pricing method selected in your system. Here we set up the due date that's automatically assigned to the restock parts invoices that we enter for this vendor, and either leave it at none, which will make the due date simply the date the restock parts invoice was entered, or the day of the month all charge invoices are due for the previous month. Let's say the due date is the 25th, for example. And then we would enter the cutoff date for this due date. Let's say this vendor generates their statements at the end of the month, so we'll just enter the 31st. That way, invoices entered in April, for example, would be due on May 25th. Or the vendor may have terms like every invoice is to be paid within 10 days. We'd enter that here. The discount for early payment is calculated from the due date. So let's say the dealer has a due date of the 25th, but gives a 2% discount if we pay the bill by the 10th of the month. So we would enter in minus 15 days. And if the invoices are tagged 15 days or more before the due date of the 25th, in this case May 10th, I get my 2% discount. Also, if the due date was left on none, you might have terms where you get a 2% discount if you pay within 5 days of the due date, so we would enter 5 in this field. Now the AP account setting is where all the invoices charged to this vendor account are tracked on the general ledger. Click the Use Default Account to have all transactions flow into the general AP account, typically $20,000, payables, trade. Or we can click Use Special Account and select another account other than the default. Then the Chart of Accounts window will open, and from this list, we highlight an account and click Select, or just double-click on the account, and all charges and payments with this vendor will flow in and out of this account on the general ledger. Let's click Catalog next, and we can select a catalog from the drop list to set up online parts lookup and ordering for this vendor. Enter the username and password provided by your parts supplier, and note here, depending on which catalog interface you select, you will need to enter in additional information according to that parts supplier's online ordering system. And our last link on the left is the notes, just for any kind of notes that you want, and these notes will print out on your vendor list if you run a vendor list from the reports icon. And this is a spell check button here on the right. I think of all the information that we just entered here under these links as reference. Under the Options button, here is where all the action is done. You can view your transactions, pay bills, enter bills by creating a new invoice or a credit memo, and receive a refund from the vendor, like a refund check for return parts to a vendor you're on cash with. We can also select to make this vendor a customer or an employee, which will link these accounts to be able to trade services if you have a vendor who is also a customer. And last, we can dial the vendor's number from the computer if you have the automatic dialing system set up. See the Pay Bills, Enter Bills, and Receive AP Credit Refund training videos for detailed instructions on how to use these features. So let's click OK to close, and this concludes the lesson on Add a Vendor.